Welcome to the Kennel Connection webinar on entering and managing inventory in Kennel Connection 6. I'm your host, Scott, and I will be walking us through how to create and manage inventory in the Kennel Connection program. The majority of this is going to take place in the inventory screen, and to go there, we're going to click the File tab, and then in the Setup section, we're going to go to Inventory. As you'll notice in the inventory section, we have on the left-hand side a list of all inventory, and on the right-hand side, information regarding that inventory. Above the inventory item information, which we'll be going through shortly, we have search options. We can choose to search by a specific vendor or a specific category. And we can choose to sort the list on the left-hand side by code or by description. Then above the inventory list, we have the search window where we can type specific items that we're looking for. And this search will be modified based on your settings you choose on the right. Above the search window, you'll see we have the option to look at inventory, vendors, and categories. I'm going to start with categories first. Kennel Connection comes with a number of preset categories. You can add additional ones or modify the ones that are currently here. The main focus of categories is to link inventory items to them for sales reports at later dates. You can get sales reports on invoicing for specific categories. For example, we could run a sales report later and get a sales report specifically on all inventory items attached to the feed category within a certain time frame. And I'll be pointing out that report near the end of this presentation. I usually recommend setting up your categories first if possible, since adding new inventory items in the system, you will be attaching them to categories. You can always go back later and change which categories the inventory items are attached to, however. To add new categories, you'll click the New button, enter the category name and description, and then click Save. And once again, we have a search window here if you have a lot of categories, you need to search for a specific one. Then we have our vendors list. The vendors list is optional. You do not need to use the vendor list in the system. Vendors can be added with contact information, including an email and memo. Vendors will also be attached to your inventory items, so you might want to set them up in advance if possible. The only real usage for vendors in the system is either A, if you want to keep the information for reference, or B, if you are going to create purchase orders in Kennel Connection. And I'll be going over that in a little bit. Then we're going to jump over to the inventory section. And as I mentioned before, on the left-hand side here, we have the full list of inventory. Just to clarify, even though this is called the inventory section, most people consider inventory being just stock on-hand product being sold. In the case of Kennel Connection, inventory is a broader term that means anything in the system that is being invoiced. So that's going to include any kind of services. You'll notice that we have a number of default items that come with the program, such as late fee, pet sit, pickup. Even if you're not using some of these items, like the pickup and delivery, these are not removable from the system because they're hardwired into the system for invoicing purposes. So you'll notice if I choose the pickup option here, the code is grayed out. I can't select it. And if I go to the delete this item by selecting it and clicking the delete button at the top, Kennel Connection will tell me not to, or that I can't. So you're going to add anything in here as far as services that being rendered, items being sold, anything that needs to end up in an invoice it when you're billing your customers. At the top, you're going to notice I have some packages here. Daycare packages, boarding packages. If you are creating packages in Kennel Connection, you are creating them in the list section, which is up at the top in the ribbon in the setup section under the file tab, in the same section where we found the inventory option. Packages are going to appear in the inventory section after they're created because they are being added to invoices. However, you cannot add packages in the inventory section, and even though the packages show in the inventory section, they should not be modified in the inventory section. Anything that happens with packages as far as creating them or modifying them should be done in the list section under the appropriate packages tab. You'll even notice as we select the packages here, it says that this item was added in the list section, and it will not show up on a regular invoice. If you have any, we actually have a webinar specifically on packages setup, and that goes further into the whole situation with specific invoices that packages will show up on. But all you need to know for the sake of inventory management is that packages should not be added or modified in inventory. They will just show up here so they can be invoiced. To add an inventory item, we're going to go and click the new tab, new button at the top. And this is going to blank out everything on the left and give us a blank inventory window. So we're going to start with our code. And for the codes, you either can enter a word or number code like we have here for 10-day or board or can lid, or you could enter a barcode. If you're using a barcode scanner to scan inventory into the system, barcodes can be added one of two ways. Either you can scan a already existing barcode into this window by highlighting it and scanning the item, or you can create a barcode by clicking the generate code box here. As long as this code window is blank and you click the box, it will generate a random barcode for you, which you can then print out in the report section, and I'll go over that shortly as well. Please keep in mind, if you are adding inventory that already has barcodes on it, any kind of product that you're selling that has a preset barcode, scanning that barcode into the inventory section is not going to fill the other criteria of the item. All the information regarding that item is not going to fill into the system. You will still have to manually enter what the item is, the price, and everything. So the barcode is really only going to be scanned in for the purposes of adding that item to invoices by scanning them when you're ringing up the customer. In this case, I think we're going to add in here, let's see, what can we add in here for our pets? I'm going to throw in a collar. So we're going to enter, I'm going to enter a large collar, so I'm just going to put collar LG. Just keep in mind when you're creating your codes, you want to create codes that if you're searching for them in the drop-down menu of your invoice, that they are easily searchable and that you can group like ones together. So in this case, I'm using collar first and LG afterwards. You know, whatever system works best for you, but that's just a tip on creating these in advance. After we enter the code, we're going to enter tax 1 or tax 2. Tax settings are set up in the business info section. Once a tax item is selected, that tax will be applied automatically when you add it to the invoice. Then if you have vendor set up, you can select a vendor. I'm going to choose Pet Clothes Ltd. Then the category, as I mentioned before, and you can scroll down and choose the specific category for your stuff. In this case, I'm just going to put it under toys, even though it's not a toy. Next to each of these, you see the retain option. If you're entering a large number of inventory items and they're all coming from the same vendor or they're all in the same category, you can click the retain box. And what this will do is after you click save and go to create another one, the category or vendor you chose, if you retain it, will remain there so you don't have to keep selecting it over and over again while you're creating the new items. We have the same options here under retail price and the same under description. Now below the category, we have an on-hand amount. This is the amount you currently have in stock for products. So in this case, if we're selling the collars, let's say I already have 10 in-house. Once again, we can retain the on-hand amount as well. and the cost. The cost is going to be the cost to you from your vendor. So in this case, let's say that the collars are costing me $2 each. We then have a retail amount. So if I'm charging $5 for that item, I can enter that here. That's going to be the price that's actually charged to your customers when you add this item to the invoice. You also have the option to create your retail price based on a markup percentage of your cost. That is over here on the right under markup. So if you want to use that, let's say my cost is $2 and I want to give a markup of 250%. I just put the percentage number in there, and then when I tab over, the retail amount is going to pop up automatically. You do not have to use the markup. You can just enter your cost and retail. You can even just enter your retail if you don't worry, if you're not concerned about keeping track of cost of items. But the markup is there if you want to keep an exact percentage of your markup. After that, we have the vendor items. So if you're ordering your items from vendors and you're keeping track of that information and you're running purchase orders and there's a vendor item number, you can enter that vendor item number here. Then the description of the inventory item. This description will show on the invoice. The usual rule of thumb I offer is that anything in the Kennel Connection that asks for a description is most likely going to be able to be seen by the customer at some point. So just keep that in mind when you're creating descriptions in the Kennel Connection, that it should be customer friendly, so to speak. In this case, this description will show on the actual invoice when you add it. So in this case, I'm going to add a random vendor number, and my description is large dog collar. Below that, we have commission set up. If you are offering a commission to employees on the item, product, or service, you're going to check the commissionable box. You're also going to want to make sure you choose whether the item is a service or a product. This is especially important for inventory items that you're selling, stock product. If we are selling collars, for example, and we list it as a service accidentally, when we sell items, the on-hand is not going to decrease. So you need to make sure product is selected so Kennel Connection knows to decrease on hand when items are sold. After we mark an item as commissionable, we can also enter a percentage or a flat rate of commission for that item. We do have a webinar specifically on the employee section setup and the commission setup for employees, and that goes into greater detail as to how the commissionable rates are applied. If you're looking for more info on commissions in the system, I highly recommend that webinar or that training video on our YouTube channel. Next to the percentage rate, we have an inactive box. I'll show that in a moment once we have this item saved. If you're using the QuickBooks Direct link, you can also choose an income account to attach this item to. We do have a webinar on the QuickBooks Direct Link setup with accounts, and that goes into greater detail on how linking accounts works and whether or not you need to link an account here. What I will mention briefly is that while we can link specific inventory items to specific accounts in QuickBooks, if we do not and leave this blank, that item is instead going to wind up going to a default income account, so you do not necessarily have to enter an income account for each item in the system. And if you bear with me 1 second, my account, my database is just being accessed for that account to demonstrate. Here we have the QuickBooks income account list. So if I wanted to add this to sales, I can just enter that there and select that. You can also add an expiration date to invoices or services in the inventory section. So if it's something you don't want to sell after a certain point, add an expiration date. After that expiration date has been reached, this item will no longer be accessible in drop-down menus on your invoices. Finally, if we go up here where I was talking about the on-hand and the low, you'll notice that we have a box marked reoccurring. If you check the reoccurring box, this item that we've created is going to appear on every invoice created in the system. This is mainly used for items such as if a facility has like a $1 insurance fee for every visit, or for mobile grooming companies that like to add a fuel surcharge to their invoices. This is done here, so that way it'll be automatically added to any invoice created in the system. So that's the only reason you want to check this. If you ever have an issue where an item keeps popping up on invoices that shouldn't be by itself, you want to go back to inventory and make sure that the recurring box has not accidentally been checked for that item. Now that I have all my basics here for this inventory item, I'm going to click Save. The item is now listed in the system. Now I mentioned before the inactive box. What the inactive box is going to do is allow us to mark an item as inactive instead of deleting it from the system. So if I click inactive on this and click Save, you notice that the item turns to red in the inventory list. And now if I go to add it, create an invoice, this item will not be accessible on an invoice. Then later, if we suddenly start selling this item again, instead of re-entering everything, all I have to do is uncheck the inactive box and click Save, and it's back with us. There are numerous reports in Kennel Connection, but there are only 6 that are accessible only in the inventory section, and they are here under the Reports tab. I had mentioned before that we can create a barcode by clicking the Generate Barcode button when the code is blank on an item. After you do that, to print labels for that barcode, you would go to the Reports tab in the Inventory section and select the top item, which is the barcode sheet. This is going to give you an option to print a sheet of 30 labels on an Avery 8160 or equivalent sheet of labels. You do not have the ability to print less than 30. It'll only print the whole 30. We hit yes, and I'm going to bring this up onto the screen just to give you an idea what it's going to look like. There's your barcodes with the name of the item. If you want to have the price included on the barcode, what I recommend doing is in the description, adding that price, saving it, then printing the barcode. And as you'll see on this new print, it's going to show anything in the description. So here's our description with the price. So you can modify that beforehand, print out your labels, and then go back into the item and modify the description again to what you want to show on invoices. The other reports here in the inventory section is the inventory list. This will give us a full list of all inventory items in the inventory section. And for this report, inventory refers to any products being sold. Then we have an inactive inventory list. Any items we marked inactive in the system will be printed out on that list. So if you have a large inventory with lots of items marked as inactive, you can print that list up for reference. Then we have the low report. Next to the on hand in the inventory section, we have a low number. This number is the number we want to Kennel Connection to remind us that we've hit when we're at a point where we should be reordering. The way the on hand works is whenever an item is sold in an invoice, once that invoice is saved, that item in the invoice is going to decrement from the on hand amount. If you delete the invoice from the system, it's going to be returned to the on hand amount. It doesn't work off of actual payment. It's working on invoicing. It's assuming that once it's invoiced, it's spoken for, so it's removed from the total. So if we sold an item right now, this is going to decrement down to 2. Since we have a low number of 5 set, when we create that invoice, Kennel Connection is going to prompt us to remind us that we've hit the low number or below the low number, and we only have this many items left. You can always change the on hand manually if you're adding to your stock, but it will change automatically with the creation of invoices. If you get that report and you want to order some inventory and you want to find out what else has reached the low number, you can go to the Reports tab and run the low report. You can choose whether to break it down by category. You can also select a specific vendor. So if you're ordering from one vendor, you can find out all the items you need from them. And then this report's going to show you basically anything in the system that has reached the low number. It's going to give you the low number, the current quantity, and it's also going to tell you how much you have on hand as far as value. Also in the report section in inventory, we have the services listing, where the inventory list will print all products in the inventory section. The services listing is going to list all services. And then finally, we have a vendor list that will print out a list of all your vendors with the contact information that you have saved. When discussing vendor lists and the low report, we've mentioned purchase orders. If you want to create purchase orders in Kennel Connection, you'll do that under the Activities tab in the Inventory section. Here we have Purchase Order and then Receive Inventory. To create a purchase order, we're going to click the Purchase Orders option and click Add. You have to have vendors set up in the Inventory section, and you have to have items attached to vendors in the Inventory section in order to create purchase orders. The first thing you need to do is select the vendor that you're ordering from. The information will show up here. You can enter a purchase order number of some kind. You do need a purchase order number for a reference in the system, so even if you're not using purchase order numbers, you can just enter the current date or just a random number if you like. The date can be modified up here. It's always going to default to the current day. And then in the order list below, we're only going to be able to select from the drop-down any items linked to this vendor. I'm going to delete that line. So if we choose the other vendor, you'll see we have a different list of items to choose from. In this case, since I created this new item, we're going to use this as the reference. So I'm going to go to Pet Clothes, and we're going to choose the large collar. Then we can enter the quantity. So yeah, I'm going to order 20. The unit price I've set up as the cost in the inventory section, so that's automatically going to calculate my price for the item. Add our purchase order, then click Save, and OK. The purchase order now appears here in the system. We can reopen it to modify it if necessary. If we modify this one, if you have an email address for your purchase order vendor, an email button will appear here. You are able to email the purchase order directly to your vendor. In this case, I don't have an email set up for that. That's why the button is not showing. To receive your purchases, once your order comes in, go to Activities and click Receive Inventory. This Receive Inventory section will have a full list of all purchase orders awaiting delivery. Highlight the one you want to receive. Click the Receive Inventory for selected PO. This is going to bring up the items that you are waiting for. The quantity received is always going to default to the full amount. The assumption is the majority of orders will be filled in full. If they don't, you can always modify the quantity received. In this case, I'm going to leave it at the full number. We click OK. A prompt just warning us that what we're doing is receiving the items and that they will be added to our on hand. So I'm going to click Yes. You'll notice that the Receive Inventory is now blank. That purchase order having been received in full will no longer appear in the Receive window. It will still be in the purchase order window, however. So if you want to keep them for future reference, you can leave them in here. Otherwise, they can be deleted. And if we go down to my large collar, we'll see that the on hand has changed to reflect the new items I purchased. We now have 26 on hand as opposed to 10. And I'm going to add a low number in here just so I know to order next time my stock drops down to 5. That's it for the most of the inventory. The other thing I want to mention is we talked about the reports available in the inventory section. I also want to point out a couple reports in the main report section that communicate directly with the inventory section. If we go to Reports tab at the top and then choose Revenue and then go down to Sales Report, as I mentioned before, creating categories in the inventory section and attaching inventory items to them allows you to fine-tune your sales reports. If we click Sales Report here, it's going to bring up what our revenue report options for Sales Report, the basics, screen or printer, detail or summary. Then we can choose to a number of criteria beyond that. We can run by customer, employee, vet, and we have the category option. So if we want, we can run a sales report and break it down by individual category for all the sales in the date range we choose. Let's say we're doing, I'm just going to go back a full year in this example. Or we can select a specific category. So as I mentioned before, if we want to find out how many board invoicings we've had in the past year, or how many even tips, how many tips we've received in the past year, if you created tips in your category section, toys sold, any category you have, we can select that item. Or we can do all categories, it'll break it down. I'm going to show all categories just to give an idea what's in here. And as you'll see, the sales report will break it down by individual category, listed in alphabetical order, and it'll break down the dates and what was sold on those dates for each category. And then at the end, you'll have a total for the entire system. There are also two inventory reports in the report section. If we go back to revenue, we have an inventory sold listing. This is going to give you, as it says, a listing of all inventory items sold. Again, in this case, inventory meaning products that are sold. So if I bring this up for the past year, it's going to show every inventory item product that has been sold in the past year, the quantity sold, the total amount, and if there are any discounts applied to the invoice. Those will appear here, and it'll give you grand totals. You also have the option under the revenue section in reports to run an inventory cost versus retail. This will show the same sales, but will give you a more specific breakdown on the revenue involved. As you can see, it's going to give you the individual item, the cost of the item, the retail sales price, and what your profit margin is for each item, and then a total at the bottom. That's basically it for how to create and manage inventory in the Kennel Connection program, Kennel Connection 6 specifically. If you have any further questions regarding the inventory section based on this webinar, you can always contact me at scott@bluecrystalsoftware.com or at 888-486-4343, extension 307. I also recommend the webinars and training videos on invoicing and receipts and the setting up the employee section and commissions, as both of those have direct correlations to the inventory section. Also, since we mentioned packages in this webinar, I do recommend our webinar or training video on creating packages and managing them in Kennel Connection.